I never imagined that in my darkest hour, a stranger's smile could feel like a lifeline. I settled into the squeaky plastic chair beside my sister's hospital bed, every muscle in my body screaming for rest. It had been 72 hours since she'd been admitted. 72 hours of fluorescent lights that never dimmed, of monitors that beeped in a relentless rhythm, of nurses whispering urgent updates I couldn't bear to fully hear. My eyes burned from the lack of sleep, and each blink felt like a betrayal of my silent vigil. The sterile white walls around me closed in with every passing second, and I found myself wondering if the air I breathed was even real, or just another part of the nightmare. In those long hours, I measured time by the beeps. Beep. Her heartbeat. Beep. My pulse. Beep. Another moment closer to hope or despair. My throat was parched, but I couldn't bring myself to drink the tepid water I'd finally forced down hours ago. My hands trembled as I clenched them together, knuckles white with the weight of worry. Outside the window, the city hummed with life I no longer felt part of. Here, in room 312, existence had narrowed to the size of a hospital bed and the frail body lying within it. I tried to recall the simple comforts of home: warm blankets, my sister's laugh, the smell of her favorite jasmine tea. But every memory felt distant, as if I were trying to grasp smoke. Guilt coiled in my chest, tightening its grip every time I thought about what I could have done sooner. If only I'd noticed her fatigue earlier. If only I'd insisted on second opinions. If only I'd taken that phone call, that email, that warning more seriously. It was in this haze of exhaustion and regret that I first noticed him. He stood in the doorway of room 312 as casually as someone entering their own home. He wasn't in scrubs or a suit, just a simple gray sweater, slightly rumpled, and dark jeans. His hair was a mess of uncombed strands, as though he'd run his hands through it in frustration. When our eyes met, I saw in his gaze the same hollow exhaustion that mirrored my own. It was the look of someone who had been here too long, watching someone they loved slip away. He paused for a heartbeat, as though gauging whether he should step inside. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting harsh shadows on his face. He looked at me, then at my sister, then back at me. In that moment, I felt a jolt of something I hadn't felt in days. Curiosity. Who was he? A concerned friend? A fellow sibling? A physician taking a moment to observe? My pride slammed into my desperation, and neither side would let me speak. Instead, he moved forward and set a second plastic chair beside mine. The gesture was simple but profound. He didn't announce himself, didn't offer condolences or excuses. He simply placed the chair down, as though he belonged here just as much as I did. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at him, at the empty seat, unsure whether to feel gratitude or suspicion. Finally, I closed the small gap between my fingers and forced my mouth to work. "Thank you," I whispered, though I didn't know why. "Thank you for invading my privacy. Thank you for reminding me I wasn't alone. Thank you for stepping into my nightmare." He nodded, as if he understood. Then, as if realizing I might need it, he held out a small bottle of water, cold, capped, untouched. I blinked, torn between pride and thirst. My throat was raw, my voice gone, but I reached for the bottle and drank, letting the cool liquid flood my senses. It wasn't the water itself that mattered. It was the acknowledgement that someone cared enough to bring it. We sat in silence for what felt like an eternity. The only sounds were the rhythmic beeps of the monitors tracking my sister's vital signs, and the low hum of the ventilation system. I watched him out of the corner of my eye, studying the way his shoulders tensed, the way he shifted his weight. He didn't fidget like a stranger waiting to leave. He settled, as though choosing to stay. Finally, he leaned forward and spoke, his voice low and careful. "She's your sister?" I swallowed, my Adam's apple bobbing like a frightened bird. "Yes," I choked out. "She's all I have." His expression softened, a flicker of recognition passing through his eyes. "I understand," he said, though the words felt insufficient. He paused, then added, "I'm here for my brother. He's in the bed across the hall." The revelation hit me like a blow. Relief and sorrow warred in my chest. Relief that he wasn't a random Samaritan offering empty compassion. He understood this pain firsthand. Sorrow that he too was trapped in these halls of uncertainty, praying for a miracle. Our shared predicament wove an invisible thread between us, a fragile lifeline I hadn't realized I craved. For a moment I considered asking his name, forging a connection that might ease the loneliness I'd carried these past days. But fear held me back. Fear that any deeper bond would only amplify the heartache if hope slipped away. So I simply nodded and looked back at my sister, wincing at the way the soft light caught the lines of worry etched on her pale face. He cleared his throat and shifted in his chair. "How long has she been here?" I swallowed hard. 3 days. My voice trembled. Since the flare-up got so bad they couldn't control it. The specialists say it's a rare autoimmune condition. They've tried everything, steroids, immunotherapy, but nothing seems to hold it back. His eyes darkened. They told my family the same thing about my brother. It felt like watching someone vanish inch by inch. I pressed my lips together, fighting back tears. The walls felt as though they were closing in. Despair threatened to pull me under. But then I remembered the bottle of water in my hand, a lifeline offered by a stranger, and I realized I was tired of fighting alone. I turned back to him. "What are you doing now?" I asked, voice quiet but determined. "Are you waiting for a diagnosis? A miracle?" He stared at his feet. I don't know. I just hope someone finds one in time." His admission was a lifeline thrown across the void. I felt a surge of solidarity, a reckless hope that perhaps together we could bear this burden more easily. "Maybe we can look for answers together," I offered before I could second-guess myself. "Share what we find, talk to more doctors, push for second opinions." He looked up, surprise flickering in his eyes. Then he nodded slowly. "I'd like that." In that moment, the sterile confines of room 312 felt less suffocating. Two strangers, bound by the same fear, had found a fragile companionship. I realized that hope, no matter how small, could bloom even in the most unlikely places, with the simplest act of kindness, the offer of a chair, a bottle of water, a shared story. We sat side by side, two weary souls clinging to a sliver of possibility. The beeps continued, steady, unrelenting, but now they felt less like harbingers of doom and more like a countdown to whatever came next. I didn't know whether my sister would pull through or if my new companion's brother would find the breakthrough he needed. All I knew was that I no longer had to face this alone. The hum of the monitors pulsed around us like a reminder of time slipping away. Just as I dared to believe that companionship might be enough to sustain me, his expression shifted, something in the curve of his mouth, the tightness of his jaw. He looked toward the door, as though summoned by an unseen force. My heart thundered. Was there new news? Good or bad? I had to know. And then he turned back to me with eyes I barely recognized, and whispered, "We have to move, now." The weight of unspoken pain hung between us like a storm cloud, waiting to burst. I lingered in the hallway just outside room 312, heart still pounding from the urgency in his voice. Only moments ago, he had whispered, "We have to move, now." And before I could even catch my breath, he grabbed my hand and steered me past the blank-faced nurse station into a deserted corridor. The contrast between that frantic momentum and the hushed hospital silence was jarring, like screaming underwater. Once we stopped behind a closed door marked Consultation Room C, he leaned against the wall, shoulders heaving. I hesitated in the frame, torn between relief at getting off the ward and anxiety over where he was taking me. My sister lay alone with machines and strangers. I'd left her side when she needed me most. But the urgency in his eyes told me there was something I needed to know. Something worth risking that guilt. I stepped in and closed the door. The room was small, lit by a single overhead panel that cast everything in muted gray. 2 chairs faced a desk strewn with medical charts. Hugh sank into one, dropping my hand as if afraid to burden me with his own grief. I leaned against the opposite wall, arms crossed, fighting the urge to pace. After the adrenaline of the hallway chase, my legs felt too heavy to carry me anywhere. I dared to ask the question that had burned in my mind since he first mentioned his brother. "Why did you bring me here? What's happening?" My voice sounded brittle in the enclosed space, like icicles breaking underfoot. He stared at the desk, fingertips drumming a staccato rhythm across its surface. The pause stretched so long that I felt the weight of every second pressing against my ribs. Finally, he lifted his gaze, eyes shimmering with something I couldn't name. Regret, fear, a flicker of hope. "I need you to see something," he said quietly, voice taut as a violin string. My pulse stuttered. "See what?" Without another word, he reached into his sweater pocket and pulled out a thin envelope, stained at one corner with what looked like old coffee rings. He slid it across the desk toward me. I picked it up, eyes narrowing as I examined the handwriting. My name, written in a familiar scrawl I couldn't place. "Open it," he urged, voice barely above a whisper. Trembling, I slit the seal and unfolded the single sheet inside. It was a letter from a hospital I'd never heard of, typed on official letterhead. My sister's name was at the top, followed by a list of biomarkers, test results, and a line that made my stomach twist. Experimental protocol recommended. Immediate enrollment required. Below that, a doctor's signature I didn't recognize. I looked up at him, voice cracking. "Where did this come from? Who sent this?" He swallowed hard and rubbed his temple. "I got it from my brother," he admitted. "He was part of that trial. It was the only thing that gave him a fighting chance." He paused, and I saw the anguish in his eyes deepen. "They approved him after he'd been in a coma for 2 weeks, when everyone else had written him off." My mind raced. "You mean your brother survived? After being declared hopeless?" He nodded, pain giving way to a glimmer of something else. "He did. He woke up asking for me by name. The doctors called it a miracle. But it wasn't magic. It was that protocol. A drug combination most companies rejected as too risky, too untested, but it worked on his specific biomarkers." I exhaled shakily, letter fluttering in my hand. "So you're here because you think my sister could be enrolled?" My voice was laced with equal parts hope and skepticism. "But what if it fails? What if it's worse than nothing?" He leaned forward, eyes locked on mine. "I know it's a gamble. I know the company almost killed the program because of one fatality in an early trial. But my brother's case proved it can work, and my sister's biomarker profile matches the only subset where we saw positive outcomes." I felt tears pooling. This suicide letter crumpled in my fist. "You risked everything to get this to me. Why?" His gaze wavered, and I saw the raw truth beneath his calm veneer. "Because I couldn't watch my brother die," he said softly. "And I won't watch your sister die either. Not if there's a chance, any chance at all." The conviction in his voice was a beating drum in the silence. I realized that beneath his measured calm lay a torrent of desperation, guilt, and fierce love. His hesitation earlier, the tapping fingers, the drawn breath, had been the storm gathering strength before the downpour. Now that the storm had broken, every drop of his fear and hope poured out. I swallowed, tears streaking my cheeks. "I want to believe you," I whispered. "But what if the board rejects it? What if they change their mind halfway through?" He stood and walked to the small window by the door, pulling back the blind to let in a sliver of sunlight. The brightness stung my eyes, but I blinked through the glare. "Then we fight," he said, voice ringing with determination. "We file appeals, gather signatures, go to the press if we have to. I have friends inside the company who owe me favors. I'll pull every string I bit my lip, heart torn between guarded optimism and long-ingrained fear. You're carrying a lot on your shoulders. He turned, and for the first time, I saw the toll it had taken. Dark circles under his eyes, a tremor in his hands, shoulders stooped under the invisible weight of responsibility. I've carried it for months, he admitted, watching him go under, not knowing if he'd ever wake up. And then, when he did, seeing how people treated him afterward, like he was a project instead of a person, it crushed me. I took a hesitant step forward. Your brother? My voice was gentle. How is he now? He offered a faint, sad smile. Alive, but changed. He can't tolerate half the things he used to, and he suffers memory gaps. But he's here. He's with me. He looked past me, as though picturing his brother's face. Sometimes I feel guilty that he survived when others didn't. I lost friends on that trial, people who believed in it as much as I did. I reached out, placing a hand on his arm. Guilt doesn't have to be yours alone. You did everything you could. He closed his eyes, drawing a shaky breath. I know. When he opened them, they were brighter, steadier. That's why I knew I had to find you. You have to hear that hope isn't dead, that even when everyone tells you to give up, there can still be an answer. My chest tightened as I folded the letter and held it against my heart. In that moment, his story, his heartbreak and triumph, became intertwined with my own. The burden I carried wasn't mine alone anymore. It was shared, and somehow that made it lighter. We both stood in silence, the sunlight pooling on the floor around us. Outside, the hospital continued its steady hum, oblivious to the revolution brewing in Consultation Room C. I realized that unspoken burdens could keep us trapped in isolation, but speaking them aloud, sharing our fears and truths, could forge a path forward. He stepped closer, voice soft. Are you willing to fight with me? I looked up at him, tears glistening. Yes, I said firmly. I will. He nodded, a flicker of relief crossing his face. For the first time that day, I felt strength surging through me, a fierce determination born from shared pain and the promise of possibility. His phone buzzed on the desk, the vibration echoing like a gunshot in the silent room. He glanced down, face draining of color as he read the screen. My heart lurched. Had the board already decided? Fear clawed at my throat as he slid the message toward me, and all I could do was brace myself for what it said. Standing under the harsh fluorescent lights at 2 a.m., I knew I was risking everything by talking to him again. The corridor was deserted, its linoleum floor gleaming like a mirror under the unforgiving ceiling lamps. I stepped out of Consultation Room C, heart hammering, and nearly collided with the nurse's station before I realized he was already there. He stood alone beside the soft glow of a desk lamp, its yellow light cutting through the greenish tint of the hallway. In that moment, he looked less like a stranger and more like the only person who truly understood the gravity of our situation. My heels clicked on the tile as I approached, every step echoing in the silence. I swallowed hard, knowing that for every inch I gained toward him, I edged farther away from my sister's bedside. Guilt tangled with desire for answers, but in the stillness of the night, I chose curiosity and connection over solitary anguish. He glanced up when I neared, expression tense but not unwelcoming. The lamp haloed his face, highlighting the dark circles beneath his eyes. His sweater hung loosely on his frame, and the fine tremor in his fingers told me sleep had abandoned him long ago. We locked eyes, sharing an unspoken question. Was it safe to speak here? I exhaled slowly and dropped into the empty chair opposite him. I shouldn't be back here, I admitted, voice low. But I needed to know how you found that letter, what you meant about fighting the board. My words tumbled out, each one risky yet necessary. He closed his eyes briefly, as if steeling himself against the pain of recollection. When he opened them, I saw the raw vulnerability there. I dug through internal memos, he confessed quietly. Late at night, After everyone else went home, I accessed emails, trial notes, anything that mentioned my brother's case. I had to know why they stopped the protocol when it showed so much promise. His finger tapped a restless rhythm on the edge of the desk. I leaned forward, curiosity battling my fear of knowing too much. "But why risk your job? Your reputation?" I asked softly. "Why risk everything to help me?" He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Because it saved him," he said, voice trembling on the edge of tears. I watched my brother slip away on that trial. They told us it was an accident, a tragic outcome. But I reviewed the data. I saw how he reacted when they adjusted his dosage, how his biomarkers shifted back toward normal. I saw him smile again, ask for me. And when they shelved the trial, citing liability, I realized I couldn't stand by and let them bury what could save more lives. My throat tightened as his words sank in. The image of his brother, regaining life against the odds, felt like a mirror of my own sister's fight. I swallowed, reaching for my own confession. I never told you this, but before she got sick, my sister was my rock," I began, voice cracking. "She was the one who held our family together after Mom passed away. When she got sick, it felt like losing her all over again, even before the diagnosis." Tears pricked my eyes, and I brushed them away, ashamed of my momentary weakness. He reached out, placing a steady hand over mine. His touch grounded me, anchoring my swirling emotions. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I didn't know." His thumb brushed my knuckles in a gentle, comforting rhythm. I blinked back the tears and nodded. "I'm sorry for needing you to do this," I whispered. "I shouldn't have put you in this position." He shook his head, the desk lamp catching the silver in his hair at the temple. "You didn't put me in this position," he said firmly. "My brother did. And I owe him every possible chance. If it means bending rules, so be it. We both want the same thing." Hope I studied his face, memorizing the determined set of his jaw and the fierce compassion in his eyes. "I wish I had that kind of courage," I confessed, voice barely audible. "I've been so consumed by fear that I forgot how to fight." He squeezed my hand gently. "You're fighting right now," he said. "Talking about it, sharing your burden. That's courage." A shaky laugh escaped me. "I'm not sure it's enough." He leaned back, running a hand through his hair as if gathering his resolve. "When my brother was at his lowest, I whispered promises to him. Promises I wasn't sure I could keep, but I did. I fought insurance companies, regulatory boards, corporate lawyers, everyone who told me to accept loss. And when he opened his eyes, asked for me, I realized no sacrifice was too great." My chest tightened with empathy. I pictured my sister alone in room 312, her eyelids fluttering with every labored breath. I pictured the devastation in my parents' eyes when they learned of her prognosis. And then I pictured my brother, alive, because someone refused to quit. "I want to be brave like that," I said, voice firming. "I want to fight for her the way you fought for him." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded, slowly. "You will be," he promised. "But first, you need rest. You can't help her if you break down." I shook my head, guilt gnawing at me. Rest feels impossible when she's fighting for her life. His gaze softened. "Then lean on me," he offered. "Let me share the weight. We'll find a way through this." Together I inhaled sharply, my heart swelling with gratitude. In the dim glow of that lonely corridor, two strangers had become allies bound by shared purpose. The lamps overhead no longer felt harsh. They felt like spotlights illuminating a fragile alliance forged in midnight's quiet. We lapsed into silence, each lost in our own thoughts. I thought of my sister's pale face, the steady beep that signaled her fight to stay. He thought of his brother's triumphant recovery, the risks he'd taken to defy expectations. And somewhere between those memories, hope flickered back to life in both of us. A distant alarm began to wail, and we both froze. It sounded different, urgent, insistent, slicing through the stillness like a knife. I glanced at him, panic flaring. "That sounds like an evacuation alarm," I whispered. He stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. "It came from the East Wing," he said, voice taut. "That's where they're running the experimental trials." My blood ran cold. If there was an emergency there, if something had gone wrong with the very protocol we were banking on, it could spell disaster for countless patients, including my sister if she were ever enrolled. He squared his shoulders, eyes blazing. "We have to check on it," he declared. "If there's a problem, we need to know." And fast I hesitated, torn between the instinct to protect my sister and the compulsion to uncover the truth. My hand still trembled where it rested in his. "Then let's go," I said, voice steady, despite the fear roiling inside me. He nodded, and without another word, we hurried down the corridor toward the distant alarm. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to chase us. My pulse thundered in my ears, each beat a reminder that time was slipping away, and with it, the fragile promise we'd dared to kindle in the dead of night. But just as we turned the corner toward the East Wing, a door burst open, and a figure in a lab coat stumbled into the hallway. His face was ashen, eyes wide with terror, and he gasped, "It's the dose. It's too much." My heart stopped, and I grabbed the man's arm. "What do you mean?" I demanded, voice cracking. And in that moment, the full horror of what we were facing crashed into me. When he handed me that sleek card, my heart felt like it stopped and started all over again. I stood rooted to the spot in the fluorescent-lit corridor, the distant wail of alarms still echoing in my ears from our frantic dash toward the East Wing. My hand tightened reflexively around the paper cup of coffee I'd grabbed from the nurse's station, a weak attempt to steady my trembling fingers. He stopped abruptly, glancing over his shoulder before he reached into his sweater pocket with a decisive calm that belied the chaos surrounding us. My breath caught as I watched him withdraw an object no different from the ordinary wallets people carried, a simple glossy card with embossed lettering. He held it out to me, palm up, and for a moment I couldn't move. The corridors around us seemed to blur into insignificance, the flickering lights casting long shadows on the linoleum floor. I froze, sensation suspended in the instant before possibility and disbelief collided. Finally, I managed to step forward, my eyes locked on the card. The hospital's antiseptic scent was overwhelmed by the metallic tang of my own blood pounding in my ears. I reached out, dainty fingers brushing against the cool surface, and lifted the card from his palm. "Michael Grant," I whispered, voice rough as gravel. Underneath, the title Chief Executive Officer gleamed in small, authoritative script. My stomach lurched as pride and need fought for dominance within me. I wanted to rip the card into pieces, to reject any notion that someone so powerful could deign to stand beside me in my misery. Yet every fiber of my being yearned for his help, for the lifeline he'd promised. I looked up, searching his face for the flicker of a lie, anything that would allow me to dismiss this truth as some absurd prank. But his eyes held steady, warm and unwavering, and I saw in them the same fierce determination I'd glimpsed earlier when he refused to back down before the board. The weight of his responsibility pressed down on him like a physical burden, and I suddenly felt a pang of guilt that I'd ever questioned his motive. My voice hitched as I swallowed. "You're the CEO." The words tasted like acid on my tongue. "Of the company running the trial." He nodded once, resolute. "Yes, it's me." His jaw twitched, betraying the tension beneath his composed exterior. "I knew meeting you in the hallway wasn't enough. You deserve to know who I am before I ask you to trust me with your sister's life." His confession hung in the air, electric as a lightning strike. I blinked, trying to process the magnitude of what he'd revealed. A CEO didn't sneak through back corridors at midnight, didn't grope for scraps of hope among desperate families. A CEO commanded boardrooms and quarterly reports, not hospital beds and emergency protocols. My mind reeled. "Why are you risking your position for me?" I choked out, indignation and gratitude warring within me. "What if the board finds out you've been operating outside official channels? You could be fired, criminally investigated." He drew in a breath, eyes filling with weariness. "I already am risking everything," he admitted quietly. "My reputation, my career, maybe even my freedom. But I've seen what this treatment can do. I've watched my brother claw his way back from death because of those experimental protocols. I can't turn my back on that truth, especially when someone I care about needs it just as badly." His words struck me like a physical blow. I pictured his brother awakening in a sterile room, blinking against the harsh light, searching for a familiar face. I pictured him, tears slipping down his cheeks, promising to fight for every life that treatment could save. And now he stood before me, offering that same promise for my sister. Trembling, I looked down at the card in my hand. "All this time," I murmured, "you could have wiped me off your schedule with a single call to your assistant." I forced a laugh that came out hollow. "Instead, you've been sneaking around like a ghost in these halls." He closed his eyes briefly, exhaling as if releasing months of pent-up guilt. "I've been here every night, watching you and your sister, learning what it means to be truly desperate. I needed to understand your fear firsthand. Numbers and reports don't capture the human cost of losing someone you love." A lump formed in my throat. I remembered the first time I saw him, stooped in that doorway, offering me a chair without a word. I realized then that every gesture had been deliberate, every risk calculated against the possibility of saving a life. His quiet determination, once confusing, now shone with clarity. I met his gaze again, my voice soft. "You've given me more than hope. You've given me proof that someone out there sees us as more than statistics." He offered me a faint, sad smile. "You and your sister deserve that much. A chance backed by evidence, not just empty promises." My throat tightened. I don't know if I can accept this. The words slipped out, laden with fear that help would come at a price I couldn't pay. What if your company decides to pull the rug out again? What if they change their minds at the last moment? He took a step closer, lowering his voice until it was a private vow. "I'll ensure they can't. I've counted on every ally I've made over the years, scientists, lawyers, board members who owe me favors. I'll pull every lever, call every favor, stand in every boardroom until they agree. You have my word." Pride flared in me at the sincerity of his promise. I tugged gently at the corner of the card, bending it slightly, a small unconscious test of reality. The plastic resisted, and I realized how tangible this offer was. A lifeline I could grasp. I slipped the card back into my pocket, my fingers brushing the cold surface. "Then I'll trust you," I said, voice firm despite the whirlwind of emotions. "For my sister's sake, I'll trust you." His shoulders eased, the tension visibly draining from his frame. He tucked his own hand into his pocket, closing the distance between us. "Thank you," he whispered. "I won't let you down." We stood there, two unlikely allies bound by a fragile cord of desperation and hope. The distant alarm had faded, replaced by the steady hum of the hospital's ventilation system and the faint beeping of monitors from nearby rooms. Outside, the city slept unaware of the battle being waged inside these walls, for cures, for families, for lives hanging in the balance. The corridor seemed quieter now, as if granting us a moment of calm before the storm. I realized that accepting his help was more than a decision to save my sister. It was a declaration that I refused to face despair alone. In that instant, I felt the beginning of something powerful. Trust, born from shared vulnerability. I exhaled, pushing back tears I hadn't realized were waiting to fall. "What happens next?" I asked, gripping the arm of my coat. He glanced at his watch, a sleek high-end model that gleamed in the overhead lights. "We start immediately," he said, determination sharpening his tone. "I'll have you back in consultation room C within the hour with the necessary paperwork and a direct line to the lead researcher. From there, we fast-track everything." My pulse quickened at the thought of action at last. "And my sister?" He nodded. "We'll prepare her for enrollment as soon as you consent. I've already alerted the nursing staff and the ethics committee that an exception is coming. They won't be able to say no." I bit my lower lip, adrenaline surging through me. "Okay," I whispered, voice trembling with relief and fear. "Let's do it." He offered me a steadying hand, and I grasped it, feeling the strength in his grip. For all his power and privilege, he had chosen to stand beside me in the fluorescent-lit corridor of a hospital, risking everything for a chance at a miracle. As we turned to head back toward consultation room C, a sudden overhead announcement crackled through the speakers. "Code Black in East Wing. All non-essential personnel, evacuate immediately." His eyes widened in disbelief as he clenched my hand tighter. The echoes of our footsteps faded into a growing cacophony of alarms. Fear churned in my gut. Had the very treatment we were banking on become the next disaster? And before I could react, the lights flickered out, plunging us into darkness. Suddenly, I was caught between two worlds: corporate boardrooms and my family's bedside. The moment he revealed himself as Michael Grant, CEO of the very company running the trial, my reality split in two. On one side lay the sterile hospital corridor, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the steady beeps of monitors marking my sister's fragile heartbeats. On the other side loomed skyscrapers, mahogany boardroom tables, polished suits and stock tickers flashing profit margins. I stood in that liminal space, heart pounding, as if straddling two different planes of existence. I felt the weight of his title press down on me, like steel. A CEO didn't belong in these neglected corners of the hospital, sneaking through back corridors at midnight. CEOs had private jets, quarterly earnings calls, golden parachutes. They didn't trade whispered secrets in deserted wings where families hovered at death's door. Yet here he was, offering me a lifeline forged from the very depths of corporate power. My mind raced with images of bottom lines and power plays. I pictured Michael surveying the company's annual report, fingers tapping impatiently as he prioritized drug development timelines against profit forecasts. I saw the board members, stern, implacable, leaning forward, demanding assurances that any treatment, no matter how life-saving, would yield a return on investment. I imagined legal teams poring over liability clauses, ready to pull the plug at the first sign of risk. And then I recalled Michael's quieter words, his voice steady and hopeful as he described that unapproved treatment. A novel combination of immunotherapeutic agents that had shown miraculous responses in early-phase subjects. His tone had softened when he spoke of biomarkers, response rates, and the clinical data that validated his belief. In that moment, data ceased being dry figures on a page. It became hope distilled into a molecular formula. My skepticism clashed violently with my desperate yearning for a cure. Logic reminded me of the countless experimental protocols that promised miracles only to leave patients in worse condition. I had seen hopeful families shattered by setbacks and side effects, by regulatory roadblocks and corporate retreats that deemed their loved ones' cases exceptions too expensive to justify. Still, a spark ignited in my chest each time Michael spoke of his own brother's recovery. Evidence, he insisted, that this particular protocol worked when applied precisely. I leaned back against the corridor wall, closing my eyes to steady myself. "Why me?" I whispered, almost to myself. The question hung in the charged air between us. Why had he chosen to share this with me, a complete stranger until days ago? What compelled him to risk everything, his reputation, his career, his legal standing for my family, when his own brother had already benefited? He stepped closer, and I sensed the exact moment his resolve hardened. In the muted hospital light, I saw the set of his jaw, the determined flare in his eyes. Because no family deserves to face this alone, he replied softly. If I can leverage every resource, every connection, to give your sister the same chance my brother had, then I have to try. His words felt like an echo of all the courage I needed to find. Yet doubt surged anew, an undercurrent threatening to pull me under. What if the board revoked their approval at the last minute? What if legal obstacles strangled the protocol before my sister could even receive the first dose? Even if Michael fought, was I prepared to watch him go to war with his own company? I opened my eyes and met his gaze. And if they do? My voice trembled despite my attempt at composure. If they call it unprofitable or too risky? What then? Michael's expression grew solemn. He reached into his pocket and brought out his phone, tapping quickly to bring up an encrypted email thread. I've already lined up allies, he said, holding the screen so I could read the subject lines. Urgent, compassionate use exception. Board member support. Regulatory committee briefing. Each thread represented a lifeline he'd cultivated. Scientists who believed in the data, legal experts willing to challenge any decision, even investors sympathetic to our cause. He handed me the phone so I could scroll, and I felt a surge of gratitude as I read the endorsements from renowned immunologists and heartfelt pleas from families who'd witnessed the treatment's impact. It was a mosaic of passion and expertise that stood in stark contrast to the cold efficiency I'd feared. Here, in his digital dossier, was the living proof that he refused to let corporate inertia dictate life or death. I handed the phone back, my fingers brushing his wrist in a silent gesture of thanks. This is more than I ever dared hope for, I breathed, but it's still a gamble. He nodded, folding his arms across his chest in a stance that radiated unshakable confidence. Every breakthrough was once a gamble, he said. Every standard treatment in use today began as an experimental protocol facing insurmountable odds. We have the data to back us. We have the will to fight. And now, thanks to you, we have the shared conviction of two families determined to see a loved one live. As he spoke, I felt the trembling in my chest ease into a steady drumbeat of determination. The chamber of my heart expanded, making room for cautious optimism alongside my lingering fear. His words bridged the two worlds I inhabited, the cold world of corporate boardrooms and the warm, anguished world of my sister's bedside. I looked down the hallway toward room 312, imagining my sister lying there, hooked to machines, her pale face a silent plea for rescue. I thought of our parents, huddled in the waiting area, faces etched with exhaustion and fear, and I thought of Michael's brother, who'd opened his eyes to a new chance at life because one man refused to accept defeat. We should get started, I said finally, voice firm. What's our first step? Michael glanced at his watch, and then back at me. Consent forms, he said. We need your signature to proceed with compassionate use. Then we'll need your sister's vitals updated for the specific protocol parameters. After that, we'll schedule the infusion in the specialized wing. The process moves fast when the board is on your side. My pulse quickened as I pictured the paperwork, the lab prep, the infusion pumps ticking down the seconds of hope. And if the board changes its mind midway? I pressed again, seeking reassurance. He offered me a small, confident smile. I've put contingency plans in place. If they backtrack, we'll go public, press briefings, patient advocacy groups, social media campaigns. The moment they see public support and potential liability, they'll reverse their decision. I've done this before with my brother's case. It worked, I swallowed hard, the immensity of his promise settling in my chest like a stone. To wage war against corporate giants required unwavering resolve, and here he stood, unflinching. Though doubt lingered at the edges of my mind, I felt a newfound resolve crystallize within me. I would stand by him, fight with him, for my sister's life. We turned to head back toward the consultation wing, each footstep echoing like a drumbeat of impending battle. The corridors felt narrower now, the overhead lights flickering as if anticipating the storm ahead. As we passed empty rooms and silent nurses' stations, I felt the boundaries between our worlds blur, merging into a single path forward. Yet, as relief washed over me, my phone vibrated with a chilling alert: board meeting emergency vote, protocol suspension. Michael froze beside me, eyes widening in disbelief. A knot of dread tightened in my chest. Had our lifeline just been severed? He stared at the screen, jaw clenched so tightly I thought it might break. And in that moment, the corridor seemed to close in, the promise of hope hanging by a thread. His promise sounded too good to be true, yet it was all I had left to cling to. I sank into the stiff vinyl chair in consultation room C, clutching the letter Michael had given me. The weight of that single page, an experimental protocol recommendation, pressed against my palm like a shard of hope. As he pulled up a second chair, I braced myself. I knew the battle ahead would test every ounce of trust I'd placed in him, and my heart trembled at the thought of promises that could shatter at any moment. He leaned forward, voice measured and calm, outlining the obstacles we faced. First, he began, we need board approval for compassionate use, an official exception. Then we have to navigate regulatory filings, ethics reviews, and secure a slot in the oncology wing's infusion schedule. After that comes dosage calibration and real-time biomarker monitoring. Finally, we'll have to prepare contingency plans for any adverse reactions. He spoke with the precision of a seasoned executive, each phrase a testament to his corporate background. As he listed each hurdle, I nodded numbly, gratitude warring with terror in my chest. How could I possibly express thanks for a promise that might evaporate if the board balked, or if an ethics committee raised objections, or if corporate lawyers saw risk rather than reward? I felt a fierce relief that someone of his stature was willing to marshal every resource for my sister. But that relief twisted into panic as each potential roadblock registered in my mind. I closed my eyes and let the room spin for a moment. In that silence, I counted my fears one by one. Side effects. What if the treatment triggered an immune overreaction? I pictured my sister convulsing, struggling for breath, her body attacking itself in a desperate, misguided defense. Corporate politics. What if someone on the board decided that the liability risk was too high, that investors' returns mattered more than a single family's plea? I imagined rows of suits deliberating profit margins while my sister's life hung in the balance. Impossible deadlines. The letter had emphasized immediate enrollment. But what if hospital bureaucracy delayed the paperwork? What if staffing shortages pushed her session back until it was too late? My chest tightened as I imagined each scenario in vivid detail. I felt tears prick at my eyes, blurring the stark white of the consultation room walls. I swallowed against the lump in my throat, determined to hold myself together, until he silenced my spiraling thoughts with words that shocked me into stillness. "I won't quit," he said, voice unwavering. "No matter what this board or anyone else throws at us, I will not let this die." His conviction hit me like a physical blow. In that moment, the abstract machinery of corporate power and clinical trials became a singular human vow. He wasn't simply a CEO delegating tasks. He was a man staking his reputation, and possibly more, on the promise of a cure. The sudden clarity of his dedication anchored me, fusing my hope and fear into single resolve. I blinked and looked up, meeting his gaze. His eyes were bright with purpose, the corporate mask of polished restraint giving way to a raw, earnest intensity. I realized, in that instant, that he had placed himself on the line for my family's sake, in the same way I would have if our positions were reversed. The enormity of that sacrifice left me breathless. Just then, the door swung open, and Dr. Patel stepped in. My heart lurched as the head physician's stern profile filled the doorway, white coat crisp, clipboard in hand. The clinical detachment in his eyes threatened to drain the room of the fragile hope Michael had built. I felt a sudden chill, as though the temperature in the room had dropped several degrees. Dr. Patel's gaze flicked between Michael and me, lips pressed into a thin line. He cleared his throat. "Mr. Grant, I received word of your request. We need to discuss the protocol parameters before any compassionate use exception can proceed." His tone was polite, but unyielding. An ambassador of institutional caution. Michael straightened in his chair, shoulders squared. The corporate veneer returned for a fleeting moment, a practiced professionalism that masked the vulnerability I knew lay beneath. He offered Dr. Patel a brief nod, eyes calculating. "Of course," he replied smoothly. "Let's go over every detail so there are no surprises." As they moved to the desk, I realized I was an outsider to their conversation. My sister's fate, subject to terms and conditions neither of us controlled. The letter in my hand felt suddenly inadequate, an invitation to a game whose rules were set by people who might not share our urgency. I watched every micro-expression flicker across Michael's face, the bite of his lip as Dr. Patel requested additional safety data, the subtle narrowing of his eyes when the physician questioned dosage limits. I felt my pulse quicken. Was he convincing the doctor, or negotiating terms he'd hoped to bypass? My stomach twisted as I imagined the board siding with caution over courage, preference charts over my sister's beating heart. Dr. Patel looked at me then, his gaze coldly assessing. "I understand you're emotionally invested," he said, voice low enough that only I could hear. "But this is an experimental protocol. We must follow every regulation to the letter. There can be no shortcuts." His words landed like a hammer. I felt tears sting my eyes, awareness dawning that every step forward could be met with a barrier. The desperation I'd felt hours ago stood exposed, vulnerable to bureaucracy's merciless grind. Michael stepped between us, voice firm. "Doctor, I appreciate the need for rigor," he said. "But I also have a responsibility as CEO, and as someone who's seen this work, to ensure that we don't lose precious time. Lives are on the line." "Doctor." Patel's jaw clenched. "I will do my duty," he replied. "But you must understand the liabilities." Michael exhaled slowly, turning back to me and offering a tight smile. In that smile, I saw both defiance and exhaustion. Despite the corporate gloss, despite the legal entanglements, here was a man who would bear the weight of every nightmare he might unleash. And perhaps more. My gratitude to him swelled, mingled now with dread. The thin line between hope and heartbreak wavered with each passing second. I closed my eyes, drawing a trembling breath to steel myself. If we got through this meeting, the next challenge would be the infusion itself. If we survived that, there would still be monitoring, adjustment, and the ever-present threat of unforeseen complications. The air in the room felt brittle, as though any wrong word could shatter the delicate promise Michael had made. I wanted to reach for his hand, to reaffirm my trust, but the formal standoff with the doctor held me back. All I could do was watch as two worlds collided, corporate authority and medical caution, under the guise of protocol discussion. In that charged silence, I realized just how fragile our lifeline was. Michael had vowed not to quit, but I understood that his promise hinged on every nuance of negotiation, every clause of every document. The fate of my sister, of my family's hope, rested in the balance between ambition and caution, between his unwavering resolve and the system's inflexible rules. I straightened in my chair, shoulders aching from hours of tension. A fierce determination flared inside me. If the board and the doctors insisted on red tape, I would fight it. If protocol demanded delays, I would push back. If anyone questioned our right to hope, I would remind them of the faces behind the data. My sister, Michael's brother, and every other patient who deserved a chance. I looked across the desk at Michael, whose posture had softened as he listened to Dr. Patel's closing remarks. His mask of corporate composure may have slipped once, but he had reclaimed it for now, his final line of defense in this complex battlefield. My heart ached with gratitude and fear, a tumultuous storm that left me breathless. I realized that praying wouldn't be enough. This fight demanded action. I needed to sign consent forms, coordinate with nurses, rally support, align every resource I had, emotional and logistical. But first I had to endure this meeting. First I had to watch the fragile promise we'd built withstand the crucible of scrutiny. Dr. Patel cleared his throat and handed Michael a single stark sheet of paper. Board condition, full liability waiver, and $2 million escrow deposit. Michael's face paled as he scanned the terms. I leaned forward, heart pounding. Where could we possibly secure that kind of money on such short notice? Dr. Patel's eyes hardened. No deposit. No exception. No compromise. And as I stared at the cold, uncompromising figure of bureaucracy before us, I realized our promise might break before it truly began. Stepping into that lab for the first time felt like entering a forbidden sanctuary. Still reeling from Dr. Patel's impossible escrow demand, I followed Michael through a tangle of hidden corridors that no family member ever saw. Every turn brought us deeper into the hospital's underbelly, hallways lined with unmarked gray doors, ceiling lights dimmed to a clinical twilight. My pulse thundered so loudly, I was certain the hum of the ventilation would drown out my own heartbeat if I stopped to listen. Finally, Michael pressed a key card against a reader, and one of the gray doors slid open. Inside, the air was cool and sterile, laced with the faint tang of reagents and metal. Rows of gleaming stainless steel benches stretched before us, each crowded with beakers, centrifuges, and racks of glowing test tubes. Humming machines punctuated the silence. A drip-feed pump here, a spectrometer there, and at the far end, a massive scanner that looked more at home in a science fiction film than a hospital wing. I halted at the threshold, breath catching in my throat. A single overhead lamp painted the center of the room in brilliant white, spotlighting a cluster of scientists gathered around a workstation. My sister's name echoed in my mind, her face, pale and determined, and I realized I'd been holding my breath. I exhaled slowly, the tension easing as I took in this world of purpose and possibility. Michael led me forward, nodding respectfully to the lead researcher, Dr. Elena Reyes. She was absorbed in her work, sleeves rolled to her elbows, dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. When she looked up, her eyes flicked to Michael, not as a corporate visitor, but as a collaborator, a gesture so natural it spoke volumes of their rapport. "Michael," she greeted him, voice low and warmed by familiarity. "You're right on time. We've been tracking the latest biomarker runs." He smiled, an expression I'd only ever glimpsed in private moments. "Show me," he replied, voice steady. I hung back, watching their exchange with a mixture of curiosity and awe. In the hushed intimacy of this laboratory, business titles and legal obligations dissolved. Here, Michael was not a CEO, but a fellow seeker of breakthroughs. Dr. Reyes pointed at a bank of monitors beside her workstation, where lines of data scrolled in neon colors against a black background. She tapped a screen, zooming in on a cluster of graphs that danced with sharp peaks and valleys. My breath caught. That jagged peak, she explained, was my sister's cell response to the first infusion of the experimental drug. The marker that mattered most, a specific protein signal, was trending upward. Higher readings meant the cells were responding as hoped. I felt a rush of relief so fierce it threatened to knock me off balance. All the boardroom battles, the escrow demands, the nights spent pacing back corridors, this single piece of data made it worthwhile. Here was proof that my sister's body was fighting back, that this treatment might truly work. Dr. Reyes turned to me, eyes bright. "Your sister's response is in the top 5% of all trial subjects. That's the good news," I blinked, tears stinging my eyes. 5%? I murmured, voice trembling. "Out of how many?" She exchanged a glance with Michael. "Out of nearly 200. Your sister's biomarkers align with the subset, showing the strongest positive response. That's why Michael pushed so hard for compassionate use. I swallowed, trying to find words. I don't know what to say. My gratitude tangled with disbelief at how far we'd come, how incredulous it felt to step from a desperate waiting room into the epicenter of discovery. Michael placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. You don't have to say anything. We just need to keep monitoring and move to the next infusion phase as soon as possible. He glanced back at Dr. Reyes. Are we clear to proceed? She nodded briskly, scanning her notes. We'll need another blood panel and ultrasound imaging to confirm organ function. But other than that, you're on track for Friday's infusion. I've alerted the nursing team. As she spoke, I noticed the lab's other occupants watching quietly from their stations. Technicians in scrubs and students in white coats hovered in the background, all eyes flicking between the monitors and me. I felt a flush of self-consciousness, like an actor invited on stage for an improvised scene. Yet their gazes were not pitying. They were hopeful. I realized then that this lab was more than a repository of equipment. It was a community bound by shared conviction. I stepped closer to the nearest bench and reached out, running a fingertip along the cool surface of a test tube rack. The tiny vials glowed with colored solutions, liquid shards of possibility. In each one lay painstaking work, cell cultures grown, reagents mixed, samples incubated. Each represented hours of trial and error. Every one of these, Michael said softly, following my gaze, was part of our journey. Each trial subject taught us something new. We're here now because people took risks, sometimes too great, and sometimes it cost lives. But we learned, we adapted, and now we can offer that knowledge to your sister. I swallowed, knuckles whitening around the edge of the bench. I wish I could thank every one of them, I whispered. Dr. Reyes stepped forward and pressed a small vial into my hand. This is a control sample from your sister's latest draw. Keep it close. Whenever things feel uncertain, remember this. We have her biological fingerprint responding to our intervention. I turned the vial between my fingers, marveling at its importance. Such a small object, yet it symbolized an enormous struggle and a fragile hope. Thank you, I breathed. Michael glanced at his watch. We've run out of hours. I need to finalize logistics with the nursing team and legal department, and then I'll update you tonight. He looked at me, eyes earnest. Rest tonight. Tomorrow, when you're back in the ward, know that this lab is on your sister's side. My chest tightened. I will. I tucked the vial into my pocket, careful not to let it rattle. He nodded and offered me a brief smile, one I recognized as the private reassurance he reserved for moments like this. Then he turned and fell into step with Dr. Reyes, exchanging technical details about dosing schedules and pharmacokinetics. I lingered in the lab's center, breathing in the hush and hum, feeling the pulse of possibility in every machine's whisper. The sterile air no longer felt cold. It felt alive. I pictured those corridors increasingly bright, the monitor's steady beeps replacing fear with data, despair with silver threads of hope. But then my phone buzzed sharply in my pocket. I froze, dread lancing through me as I pulled it out. The screen lit up with a single message. Urgent, nursing report. Yesterday's control sample contamination detected. Retest required immediately. My heart plunged. The lab's humming machines fell eerily silent in my mind, and for a moment I was back in the sterile ward, staring at my sister's pale face. No more assurances, no more data, just the echo of alarms and the fragile thread of a promise that now trembled in my hand. The ledge of hope I'd climbed suddenly crumbled beneath me. Michael's name flashed on my screen next. Was he as blindsided as I was? I glanced at the test tube in my pocket, its glow feeling uncertain. Every step we'd taken to this sanctuary now seemed at risk of collapsing. And as the lab's humming faded into dread, I realized we might have lost our lifeline. Watching the graph climb felt like seeing a lifeline extend toward my sister. I stared at the glowing monitor as the fluorescent green line crept upward, each tick a heartbeat in visual form. My breath caught in my throat. For days, I'd hovered between hope and despair, checking and rechecking vital signs that seemed to taunt me with their stubborn flatness. But this rising curve was different. It wasn't just numbers. It was proof that something inside my sister was rallying, fighting back against the disease that had threatened to swallow her whole. My eyes lingered on the data points, the steady baseline, the slight uptick at the 6-hour mark, the sharp incline where the experimental drug had begun doing its work. I could almost hear the quiet hum of the analyzer cheering her on. Around me, the lab fell into a hushed reverence. Technicians paused mid-task, glancing at the chart as though watching a race unfold. Even the air seemed to crackle with anticipation. I felt a jolt of excitement electrify the room. It started in my chest and raced through every fiber of my being. My pulse accelerated, matching the tempo of the rising line. I swallowed, fighting back tears I wasn't sure were ones of relief, gratitude, or pure disbelief. After all the boardroom battles, the legal hurdles, the nights spent pacing hospital corridors, this single graph distilled it all into one unassailable truth. Her body was responding. Michael's voice broke the silence, low and soft, brimming with relief. "Her T-cell count is increasing," he whispered, leaning close so only I could hear. "That means the immunotherapy is activating as we hoped. We're seeing a 30% boost in cell-mediated response." His words were matter of fact, yet they carried a weight of triumph I'd never heard from him before. Across his composed exterior, I saw joy glimmering, an emotion he had guarded fiercely until now. Tears sprang to my eyes, but they were laced with fresh terror for what might come next. Every breakthrough carried the risk of backlash, a sudden spike in inflammatory markers, an organ reaction, or unforeseen side effects that could undo weeks of progress. I fought the urge to voice my anxiety, afraid that speaking aloud might jinx this moment. Instead, I nodded, letting Michael's calm assurance steady me. The lead scientist, Dr. Reyes, tapped the screen and brought up a new set of data: cytokine levels, liver enzyme counts, and renal function graphs. Her brow furrowed as she reviewed the metrics, then softened as each fell within acceptable parameters. "We can move forward with the next phase," she announced, voice tinged with excitement tempered by cautious optimism. "We'll adjust the dosage by 5% to maximize efficacy while minimizing risk. We need to monitor her response every 4 hours and run a full panel at 24 and 48 hours post-infusion." Urgency hummed beneath her words. She outlined the plan crisply. "Prepare the next dose in the adjoining sterile room. Have the on-call infusion nurse on standby. Coordinate with the imaging team for an ultrasound check. And alert the ICU team to be ready for any acute reactions." Her methodical breakdown transformed my chaotic hope into a concrete roadmap, each step a milestone in our fight. My hand shook as I reached out to touch Michael's arm, seeking reassurance in the warmth of his presence. "We're really doing this," I whispered, voice trembling. "She's responding. I can't believe it." The vial of her blood sample still sat in my pocket, a tangible reminder of how far we'd come, from that contaminated control sample scare to this moment of undeniable promise. He placed his hand over mine, firm and steady. "Yes," he said, eyes shining. "We're moving ahead. I've already authorized the nursing staff to prepare the protocol for the adjusted dose. The board's interim committee granted us provisional clearance based on these results. We just need your sign-off once we have the final consent forms updated with the new parameters." I drew in a shaky breath, blinking rapidly to clear my vision. The weight of my responsibility settled on my shoulders. Sign here, initial there. One misplaced signature could derail everything. But I also felt a surge of empowerment, I was no longer a passive observer, waiting for news. I was an active participant in the fight for my sister's life. I stood and crossed to the mobile workstation, where the updated consent document had been laid out. The screen glowed with lines of text: trial name, updated dosage schedule, potential side effects, risk acknowledgments, emergency procedures. I scrolled through the sections, reading each clause with meticulous care. Beneath each paragraph lay a reminder of the stakes: potential fever spikes, cytokine release syndrome, transient organ stress. Yet, under every risk lay the promise we had just witnessed on the monitor. My finger hovered above the digital signature field. Time seemed to slow as I reconciled the fear in my chest with the hope in my heart. I thought of my sister, her laughter at the beach last summer, her fierce determination in the face of adversity, the way she had carried our family through loss. I pictured her fighting now, her cells rallying across microscopic battlefields inside her veins. I thought of Michael's brother, waking to see his sister's name on a bedside card again. And I thought of all the families who hadn't had a glimmer of hope to cling to. I pressed down, and the software accepted my signature with a soft chime. The document locked, the next phase activated. Dr. Reyes clapped her hands once, a gesture childlike in its exuberance. "Prep the next dose," she ordered the nurse, already fastening on sterile gloves. The infusion team sprang into action, cleaning ports, swirling vials, calibrating pumps. I stepped back, marveling at the coordinated flurry, each motion precise, each gesture purposeful. Michael observed the choreography, a proud smile curving his lips. "You did it," he said quietly, turning to me. "You signed her life into this next round." His words felt like a benediction, sealing our commitment to the fight. I exhaled, tension easing from my shoulders as adrenaline subsided into a steady resolve. "We did it," I corrected, meeting his gaze. "All of us." In that lab, under the hum of machinery and the watchful eyes of scientists, I felt the full force of collective effort. Research teams, legal advisors, clinicians, nurses, and two families unwilling to accept no as an answer. Yet before I could lean into that triumph, an alert tone sounded from the infusion pump. A red light blinked on the machine's display. The nurse frowned and tapped the screen, reading the error code. Her brow furrowed as she adjusted a dial, but the alarm continued. Dr. Reyes rushed over, followed closely by Michael and me. Together, we read the message: "Intravenous line occlusion detected." Flow rate halted. My chest tightened as I realized what that meant. The infusion had stopped. Every moment without the drug risked giving the disease another foothold. I scurried forward, heart racing, to help the nurse troubleshoot. But even as we worked to clear the line, a cold dread seeped into my veins. The occlusion alarm pulsed in the air, punctuation to our racing thoughts. Michael's lips pressed into a thin line as he watched the pump's error code flicker. I grabbed the tubing, scanning for a kink, any blockage I could fix, while Dr. Reyes barked instructions. Outside the lab's glass door, the corridor lights dimmed unexpectedly, plunging us into tense half-light. And as the pump's red light glowed ominously, I realized this glitch could undo all the progress we'd fought so hard to achieve. One email could erase everything we'd fought for, and it arrived in my worst nightmare. My phone buzzed harshly in my pocket as I stepped out of the lab, adrenaline still coursing through my veins from the infusion pump crisis. I fished it out with shaking fingers and saw the sender, the company's executive board. My heart plunged before I even read the subject line. With a trembling thumb, I tapped the notification, bracing myself for bad news, but nothing could have prepared me for this. The subject line stared at me in merciless black type. Board review. Project suspension. I swallowed against a sudden dryness in my throat and read the audacious first lines of the message. "Dear Mr. Grant and Ms. Rahman, After careful consideration of the interim data and consultation with our legal and financial departments, the board has voted to suspend all compassionate use exceptions for Protocol X, effective immediately. We regret any inconvenience and trust you understand the company's fiduciary responsibilities. My vision blurred as the formal words dragged me under. I'd known the board could reverse course, but I never believed they actually would, at least not before my sister's next infusion. I glanced up at Michael, who had walked a few steps ahead, pacing in the corridor outside the lab. His back was rigid, shoulders squared as though he were bracing himself for impact. I swallowed again, struggling to steady my voice as I cleared my throat and broke the news. "They've suspended the project," I whispered, pressing the phone toward him. Michael's stride froze mid-step. For a heartbeat, he said nothing, as if he were listening for a denial. Then he reached out, fingers brushing mine as he snatched the phone. I watched his shoulders slump as he scanned the terse lines. The polished veneer of corporate confidence cracked in that instant, replaced by a storm of fury and resignation. His jaw clenched, and I saw his knuckles turn white against the metal railing lining the hallway. The corridor lights flickered overhead, casting the two of us in stark relief against the hospital's pale walls. In his eyes, I saw war, rage against the board's betrayal, anguish for the patients they'd just abandoned, and a bleak acceptance that every promise I'd placed in him now teetered on a knife's edge. Panic roared up in my chest, drowning out rational thought. All the data, the approvals, the midnight breakthroughs, vanished with one stroke of a pen. My sister was alive because we'd seized a fleeting opportunity. Now it felt as though someone were stealing that opportunity away, pulling the rug out from under our fight. "They can't stop this now," I blurted, voice cracking. "They promised. My sister's life depends on the next dose. You can't let them just pull the plug." He flung the phone onto a nearby bench, where it clattered against the metal and slid to a halt. He ran a hand through his hair, the frustration etched in every line of his face. "I won't let them," he growled, more to himself than to me. "I'll fight this." In that moment, I realized how much we'd become partners in this battle. Two determined souls clashing with institutional power. Yet I could see the toll on him. The long nights spent lobbying board members, the back-channel negotiations with legal teams, the countless favors called in just to keep us alive this far. Now we were up against the board's final authority, and I wondered if even his influence could prevail. Footsteps echoed from around the corner, and I turned to see two men in tailored suits, approaching, executive-level legal counsel, no doubt summoned by the same email. Their faces were impassive as they entered our makeshift war room, the quiet stretch of corridor outside the lab. They carried tablets in sleek cases, ready to walk us through shutdown procedures. Michael straightened, smoothing his sweater over his tense shoulders. He met them head-on, chin lifted in defiance. "What are your orders?" he asked, voice low but unwavering. The taller counsel clicked open his tablet, scanning the board's resolution. "Per the board's directive," he began, "all compassionate use protocols for this project are to be halted within 24 hours. We require immediate cessation of patient enrollment and the recall of any pending dosages. Additionally, legal is preparing formal suspension notices to be served to all participants. You will receive them. By tomorrow morning, my pulse thundered. 24 hours, no grace period, no extension, no mention of my sister's unique response. As they spoke, I felt the ground shift beneath me. The reservoir of hope I'd been drawing from was leaking away, drop by drop. I took a step forward, desperation lacing my tone. Please, there has to be an exception. My sister's biomarkers align with the successful subset. We have data. Endorsements? The shorter counsel raised a hand. The board's decision is final. Exemptions undermine corporate governance and expose the company to unnecessary liability. You may submit an appeal, but it will be reviewed at the next quarterly meeting, 3 months from now. 3 months. Every second of delay could cost my sister her life. I felt tears sting my eyes, anger and helplessness tangling in my throat. I turned to Michael, needing his strength more than ever. He squared his shoulders and faced the legal team. "If liability is their concern, I'll cover it," he declared, voice steady and cold. "Escrow funds, legal indemnity, whatever it takes, I'll put up personally guaranteed collateral." The two lawyers exchanged a measured glance. The lead counsel tapped the tablet once more. "Pledges of personal capital do not override board authority. This directive comes from the highest level. There will be no exceptions." He paused, as though expecting us to object. When we fell silent, he snapped the tablet shut, tucking it under his arm. "You have 24 hours to comply. The necessary forms will be delivered to your office tonight." The weight of their finality settled over us like a physical blow. The lawyer's footsteps echoed away, leaving Michael and me alone in the corridor once more. We watched them go, the distance growing until they rounded the corner and vanished. I sank back against the wall, knees buckling as exhaustion and fear washed over me. Michael remained standing, rigid as a statue, jaw clenched. For a moment, I thought he might collapse under the pressure, but then he drew in a deep breath, lifting his chin as if to challenge the world itself. "My board," he muttered, voice low with bitter contempt. "I built this company from the ground up. I've sat in those meetings, fought for every penny of R&D funding, convinced them this protocol was worth the risk. And now they turn their backs at the first sign of cost." His hands curled into fists at his sides. I reached for him, placing a hand on his arm. "We can fight," I said softly, desperate to inject hope back into the cavernous pit of despair. "We'll go public. Press releases, patient advocacy groups, whistleblower complaints. We'll make this a scandal they can't ignore." He looked down at my hand, eyes rimmed with fatigue and unspoken grief. "There are legal risks in going public," he warned, voice thick. "They'll bury us in litigation, freeze assets, and brand us renegades. I risk losing everything, my career, my company, maybe even facing charges for disclosure violations." I felt a flicker of resolve ignite within me. "If it means saving my sister, I'll risk it all too," I insisted. "Together, we're stronger than they are. People will rally behind a mother fighting for her child, and a CEO willing to stand with her." He met my gaze, a slow, weary nod acknowledging both our desperation and our alliance. "All right," he said, voice gravelly with emotion. "We take it public. We mobilize every faction we've built. We challenge their decision in the court of public opinion while filing every legal appeal we can muster." I drew in a shaky breath. "Then we start tonight. We need evidence packets, patient testimonials, data summaries, everything we can hand to the press and regulators." My mind raced through contacts, journalists we could trust, advocacy networks we could engage. "I'll coordinate with the patient groups. You handle the legal strategy." He studied me, gratitude and exhaustion warring in his gaze. Finally, he nodded once, resolute. "Do it." He reached into his coat and pulled out his phone again, swiping through contacts. "I'm calling my PR director and our legal lead. We'll need a secure line. No record I mirrored his movement, pulling my phone from my pocket and setting it to secure mode. "I'll draft a statement and pull the clinical data," I said. Then we hit send. Together, we stood in that sterile corridor, two figures poised on the brink of war against a corporate fortress. The hum of the hospital seemed distant now, replaced by the roar of determination swelling in our chests. As Michael tapped out a message, a third notification erupted on my phone. SEC investigation. Anonymous tip. Protocol X data irregularities. His fingers froze mid-swipe, and I felt the air constrict around us. My mind spun. Was this a lifeline, or a noose tightening? Behind us, the corridor lights flickered ominously, as though echoing the uncertainty of our next move. And in that charged Silence. I realized our fight had just become infinitely more perilous. I never expected to find myself leading a rebellion against corporate giants. But there I was. I planted my feet in the linoleum corridor outside the boardroom, heart thrumming like a war drum. Around me, the sterile lights of the hospital flickered overhead, their hum drowned out by the tension in the air. Executives in crisp suits stormed toward us, documents clutched in white-knuckled hands, suspension orders, legal injunctions, ultimatums stamped with the company seal. Behind them marched a phalanx of counsel, faces unreadable, voices poised to deliver cold verdicts. Michael stood beside me, tall and unyielding, his eyes like flint as they tracked the advancing tide. His usual corporate ease was gone, replaced by a calculated defiance that sent ripples through the circle of onlookers. He didn't flinch when the general counsel barked, "Mr. Grant, you have 20 minutes to comply, or we proceed with contempt charges." He didn't hesitate when the senior vice president hissed, "Withdraw your request now, or we'll freeze your personal assets." Instead, he squared his shoulders and met their glare head-on, as if daring them to test him. My pulse pounded so loudly I thought they'd hear it. I fought the urge to retreat, to hide in the safety of the lab or the comfort of the ward. But this was our moment, our fight. I swallowed my fear and lifted my chin, finding my voice in the echo of Michael's courage. "You're not listening to reason," I said, each word measured but fierce. "These aren't just statistics on a spreadsheet. These are lives. My sister's life, my brother-in-law's, countless others who deserve a chance." A murmur rippled through the assembled executives. The senior counsel's lips thinned to a razor's edge. "Miss Rahman," he drawled, voice icy, "this isn't about lives. It's about liability, profit forecasts, shareholder value. You understood that when you signed the consent forms." "I did," I shot back, heat flaring in my chest. "But I didn't realize I was signing away my right to fight for her. I won't stand by while you sacrifice hope on the altar of profit." The tension crackled like electricity. Hospital staff peered through open doors, their eyes wide as they witnessed the unlikely spectacle. A patient's family member and a CEO, united in defiance, standing their ground against an army of corporate lawyers. In that moment, our solidarity became a beacon. Others leaned forward, whispering to one another, their collective breath humming with anticipation. Michael's jaw tightened. He glanced at me once, a silent question flickering in his eyes. "Are you ready?" I nodded, feeling a surge of resolve flood my veins. We had come too far to back down now. The lead counsel advanced, his tablet held like a gauntlet. "Last warning," he snarled. "Comply, or face consequences that will haunt you for the rest of your life." I stepped forward, placing a hand on Michael's arm. "Consequences are for cowards," I said softly but firmly. "We'll face whatever comes." Because surrendering hope is the real tragedy. A hush fell over the corridor, so heavy it pressed against our eardrums. The executives exchanged uneasy glances, unaccustomed to being challenged in their own domain. I felt the power shift beneath my feet, an undercurrent of possibility that shone brighter than the overhead lights. Then the senior vice president cleared his throat and spoke with a voice that rattled the silence. "Fine. You want war? You'll get one. But don't say we didn't warn you." He tapped his tablet, and in an instant, 2 corporate security officers appeared at his elbow, their stern faces unreadable. My breath caught. Security meant isolation, locked doors, surveillance, legal injunctions. But I refused to buckle. Instead, I squared my shoulders and let the fire in my chest guide me. "We'll negotiate in the public eye," I declared, voice echoing against the walls. "Whistleblower channels, press briefings, patient advocacy groups. We'll expose every dirty secret you've swept under the rug, and we'll do it before you can silence us." The room trembled with my words. I could practically see the shift in atmosphere as the executives wavered, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. They had power But we had truth on our side. The data, the human faces behind the trials, the moral high ground they couldn't touch without risking their reputations. Michael nodded, a fierce solidarity passing between us. "Send the press release," he commanded quietly, already dialing his secure line. "And have the legal team draft the injunction filing." We move in 1 hour. I watched the council's expression morph from scorn to grudging respect. They realized we were serious, willing to escalate to open conflict. The 2 security officers took a half-step back, as if sensing the battle lines drawn in the hospital's hushed corridors. I turned to the small gathering of nurses and researchers who had gathered at the edges, drawn by the commotion. "Thank you," I said, voice raw with gratitude. "Your support means more than you know." One nurse, her eyes glistening, stepped forward. "We believe in this treatment," she said quietly. "We'll testify if we have to." Another technician added, "We've seen the data with our own eyes. This protocol works." Their solidarity bolstered me, fueling the rebellion in my veins. I realized we had built a coalition that stretched beyond boardrooms, patients, families, medical staff, scientists, all united by a common cause. Corporate might have resources, but we had purpose. The senior counsel cleared his throat once more, stepping forward as though to reclaim control. "Very well," he said, voice tight. "Proceed at your own risk. But know that if you cross certain lines, the company will retaliate with every legal weapon at its disposal." Michael's gaze sharpened. "Then we'll be ready," he replied. "Thank you for your warning." The counsel snapped his tablet shut and retreated, flanked by the solemn security officers. The executives melted away down the corridor, their footsteps receding like the tide awaiting our next move. I exhaled, tension easing in my chest. The corridor felt charged, alive with our defiance. Nurses and researchers slipped back to their duties, exchanging furtive smiles and nods. The echo of our stand lingered in the air, a promise that we would not be silenced. I turned to Michael, voice trembling with emotion. "We did it," I whispered. "We made them back down." He offered me a tight smile, exhaustion etched into his features. "For now," he cautioned. "But battles are never over." He scanned his phone, reading updates from our legal and PR teams. "They've filed the injunction. The press release is live. We have their attention, and public opinion is already shifting." I felt hope and fear entwine in my chest like twin serpents. This victory felt monumental, yet I knew it was only the beginning. The board could regroup, the legal battles could drag on for years, and my sister's life still hung in the balance of time. But in that corridor, with our allies at our backs and our enemies warned, I felt something I hadn't known since this all began: empowerment. I realized that rebellion wasn't just about opposing power. It was about reclaiming agency over our own lives. Michael reached out, squeezing my hand. "Come on," he said softly. "We need to get back to your sister. She deserves to know we're fighting for her." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Together, we turned and walked down the corridor toward room 312, our footsteps echoing like defiant drumbeats. Every stride was a declaration. We would not be silenced, we would not back down, and we would see this through, no matter the cost. Just as we neared my sister's door, the overhead speaker crackled to life, and a voice I never expected boomed. "Code Black, containment breach in oncology wing." Michael froze beside me, eyes wide with alarm. I felt my heart drop into my stomach. Was our fight about to become even more dangerous? And as the emergency lights flickered on, I realized our rebellion had triggered a crisis, far larger than we ever imagined. Signing that paper felt like leaping off a cliff, and praying there'd be a net below. My hand trembled as I held the final consent document, its crisp edges cutting into my palm like the sharp edge of uncertainty. We had won our battle in the halls, rallied support, and forced the company's hand. But nothing would matter if we didn't complete this one last step. Michael stood beside me, shoulders squared, eyes fixed on the stack of forms. With a single motion, he invoked the emergency protocols we'd spent weeks lobbying for, bypassing every bureaucratic hurdle. In that moment, I felt both awe and terror. This was his ultimate act of defiance against his own board, and I knew it could cost him everything. He pressed a button on his phone, sending an encrypted dispatch to the head nurse. Activate Protocol X, Compassionate Use, Code Red. Override all standard scheduling. Full priority. Almost instantly, I heard the distant hum of the infusion pumps powering back to life, their rhythmic whir echoing through the sterile corridors like an army awakening for battle. The mechanical heartbeat of the machines filled me with a strange comfort, a promise that action was finally underway. I squeezed Michael's hand, feeling the warmth of his determination flow into me. Together, we moved down the corridor toward the oncology wing's isolated suite, our footsteps echoing off the linoleum floor. With each step, I felt the weight of every obstacle we'd conquered. The board's ultimatums, the breach alarms, the threat of legal retaliation. Now, all that remained was to see this through, to transform paperwork into healing life. As we entered the infusion room, the scene was chaotic but purposeful. Nurses in blue scrubs darted between stations, setting up IV poles, calibrating drip rates, and labeling vials with my sister's identification code. Their faces were etched with grim determination, the same resolve I'd seen in Michael's eyes. When I caught one nurse's gaze, she offered me a nod of solidarity, as though the personal stakes transcended every protocol and policy manual. Michael strode to the central console and tapped in the final authorization codes. A soft chime echoed through the room, and the main console flashed green. Protocol X confirmed. Initiate first infusion. The roar of machines intensified as pumps whirred to life, syringes primed, and sterile tubing unfurled like white ribbons of hope. I felt a shiver run down my spine. Technology in motion, transforming promise into potential cure. I stood by Michael's side, hand in hand, as the lead nurse approached with the first human dose. She wore a name badge that read Lynn, her expression unreadable beneath the surgical mask. Lynn's gloved fingers hovered over the infusion port on my sister's arm, and I found myself holding my breath. Time slowed, every second stretching like an elastic band ready to snap. "Ready," Lynn announced, her voice calm but laced with urgency. She pressed the syringe's plunger, and the fluid slid into my sister's vein with a soft hiss. I watched the drip chamber fill, each drop falling in slow motion, fail-safe clicks marking the passage of precious medicine into her bloodstream. A tremor of hope flared in my chest, but then my phone buzzed with an incoming secure message. Board HQ, all hands, security lockdown, reverse protocol within 30 minutes. Cease unauthorized infusions or face immediate legal action. I glanced at Michael, whose face paled as he read the text. The room's ambient hum suddenly felt like a countdown to a second betrayal. He whispered, voice tight with controlled panic. "They're pulling every lever to stop us. They've ordered security to storm this room unless we comply." I felt adrenaline spike, blood thundering in my ears. The infusion line continued its steady drip, each drop a lifeline slipping through the narrowing window of time. Nurses froze mid-task, eyes darting between their stations and the locked door. Lynn's gloved hand tightened on the syringe. The machine's whir became a chorus of tension. In that charged air, the clash between life and corporate decree played out in microseconds. My sister's survival versus the company's edicts. I stepped forward, placing my hand on Lynn's arm. "Please," I whispered, voice cracking. "We cannot stop now." My plea felt small against the machinery's mechanical insistence, but I knew it was all I had. Lynn's eyes met mine, and in that fleeting connection, I saw her resolve harden. She nodded once, as if acknowledging that medicine could not be governed by policy alone. Michael squared his shoulders and drew in a slow breath. He tapped his phone again, overriding the HQ message with the emergency override code we'd secured through our legal skirmishes. "Override confirmed," he announced, voice echoing through the sudden silence. "Security protocols suspended until patient stabilization. Send orders to all units." The locked door clicked, and the nurses exhaled in unison. The infusion line resumed its steady murmur, the machine's lights blinking with approval. I felt tears sting my eyes, relief mingled with the knowledge that this breath might be fleeting. As the infusion continued, I glanced at Michael. Sweat beaded at his temples, and the weight of his rebellion pressed down on him like a boulder. I reached out and brushed his cheek, surprising him with the gentleness of my touch. "Thank you," I whispered. "You did it." He managed a weary, grateful smile. "We did it," he replied, though his gaze flicked back to the console, watching the progress meter climb from 0 to 25%. But this is far from over. At that moment, my phone buzzed again. Another HQ dispatch, this one marked urgent and origin tagged from the company's chief legal officer. "Prepare for full-scale corporate intervention. Deploy CRO teams to audit all Trial X data in 2 hours. All devices subject to seizure." The words were a hammer blow to the tenuous calm we'd achieved. I felt adrenaline and fear surge through my veins, the two forces locked in a battle of their own. My sister lay unconscious, her body accepting the first dose of our rebellion, and I realized that every tick of the infusion pump was borrowed time. If the corporate intervention arrived, they could seize the pumps, invalidate the trial data, and strip away the legal protections we'd fought. So hard to install. Michael glanced at me, his eyes reflecting both defiance and dread. "We have to buy more time," he murmured. "Notify the press. Leak the data. We need public pressure before they can pull the plug." I nodded, mind racing through contacts and secure email channels. "I'll draft a release right now," I said, pulling my phone free. My fingers hovered over the keys, heart pounding with the urgency of our next, possibly final move. In that charged moment, the machine's hum, the sterile lights, the faces of exhausted nurses, all faded into a single, overwhelming focus. We had signed away everything on that paper, and now our fates, and my sister's life, rested on the choices we made in the next precious minutes. As I hit send on the press release, the intercom crackled to life with a voice I knew all too well. "This is security. Stand clear of the infusion suite. Authorization revoked." Michael lunged for the master console, fingers flying over the overrides. Alarms blared, lights flashed red, and the locked door hissed as it began to unlatch. In that cacophony of emergency, I realized we were 1 second away from losing everything, or making history. And with a final, resolute breath, I prepared to face whatever came next. As the infusion began, every second felt like a heartbeat away from either miracle or tragedy. I sank onto the edge of my sister's bed, the sterile sheets cool against my palms. The infusion pump at her side clicked and hissed, each drop of medication slipping into her bloodstream like a promise cast into the void. I watched the fluid rise and fall in the chamber, mesmerized by its relentless rhythm, my own heartbeat thrumming in tandem. Every pulse felt like a prayer, each one carrying the weight of hope, fear, and everything in between. I bent closer, brushing a loose strand of hair from her forehead. Her face was pale under the fluorescent lights, chest rising and falling in fragile synchronicity with the machine's drip. I closed my eyes and let the steady murmur of the hospital wash over me. Distant footsteps, the hum of monitors, the soft click of nurses recording vitals. It was a lullaby of uncertainty, laced with the possibility of redemption or heartbreak. With my sister unconscious, I could only whisper words into the thin air above her pillow. "Please," I breathed. "Let this work. Let it reach every cell fighting to survive." My words dissolved into the hush, unheard by anyone but the steady whir of the pump and the vigil of her silent form. I felt a gentle pressure on my hand and looked up to see Michael standing beside me. His eyes were red-rimmed with exhaustion, but they shone with a fierce determination I hadn't seen before. He reached down and took my hand in his, warm, unwavering. His touch anchored me, a lifeline tethered to the promise we had fought so desperately to secure. We sat together in silence, two souls bound by shared sacrifice and wounded hope. The swell of emotions inside me roared like a storm. Relief that the infusion had finally begun. Terror that a single complication could undo weeks of progress. Love so intense, I felt it might burst from my chest. I breathed in his steady presence, drawing strength from his resolve, even as doubt churned beneath my ribs. Behind us, the lab team huddled around a row of monitors in the corner of the room. I turned, watching the glow of data scrolling across screens. Oxygen saturation, blood pressure, heart rate, white blood cell counts. The scientists' faces were pale, their breaths held in unison. Every statistic was a lifeline, a tiny clue in the battle raging within my sister's veins. I felt my throat tighten. This moment was the culmination of so many battles. The midnight chases through empty corridors, the boardroom rebellions, the flash of hope in that lab, the frantic negotiations that nearly broke us. All of it led to this bedside vigil, where nothing was certain and everything was at stake. Minutes ticked by in merciless slowness. I counted each one, marking the passage of time on my fingers, as if tallying seconds might shape the outcome. Michael rested his other hand on the bedside rail, watching me with an intensity that made the room shrink around us. In his eyes, I saw the reflection of my own fear, the specter of failure that threatened to swallow every ounce of hope we had nurtured. A soft beep sounded from the monitor, and I flinched. The lead nurse, standing by the console, leaned forward to adjust a dial. Her movements were precise, practiced, every action a small prayer in motion. I swallowed, my own prayers caught in my throat. What if the side effects flared? What if the board's counterattack came at the worst possible moment? The memory of alarms blaring and doors locking flashed through my mind, reminding me how close we had come to losing everything. Michael squeezed my hand, his voice low but steady. "This is the hardest part," he said, nearly inaudible over the machine's murmur. "The waiting." His gaze flicked to the monitor, then back to me. "But each beat is progress. Each drop is a step," I nodded, drawing courage from his words even as terror lanced my gut. "I know," I whispered. "I'm just so afraid." The confession slipped out, raw and vulnerable. He dropped to one knee beside me, taking both my hands in his. "Fear doesn't mean failure," he said gently. "It means you care. And caring gave us the strength to bring you here." His thumb brushed over my knuckles. "We'll face whatever comes, together." A brittle laugh escaped me, tinged with both gratitude and sorrow. "I don't know what I'd do without you," I admitted, voice trembling. He gave me a lopsided smile. "You'd find me," he replied simply, "because none of this was just business, or politics. It was personal. From the start I felt tears slide down my cheeks, unbidden." He wiped one away, leaning his forehead against mine in a quiet moment of unity. In that fleeting contact, I tasted both victory and fear, the knowledge that we had won a crucial battle, yet the war still had uncertain terrain ahead. I turned back to my sister and placed a gentle kiss on her hand. "Stay with us," I whispered. "Fight for us." The pump's steady drip answered with its own silent rhythm, a heartbeat of possibility. I closed my eyes, willing her body to respond, to heal. Time spiraled in and out of focus. The monitor's data scrolled mercilessly, each metric a small victory or a new warning. I watched white blood cell counts tick upward, then held my breath as liver enzyme levels hovered near their limit. I tracked oxygen saturation climbs alongside blood pressure dips. Each fluctuation felt like another edge in a razor's duel between life and death. The lab team's tension was palpable. One technician whispered to another, nodding toward the monitor. Another adjusted a pipette at the diagnostic station, as though gathering precious proof. Their silent choreography underscored how fragile our hope truly was, how easily a single anomaly could tip the scale. My heart thundered as I realized I was praying with every cell in my body, not just for my sister's survival, but for every person who would one day depend on this treatment. For Michael's brother, for families I'd never meet, for the scientists who sacrificed their careers and reputations to make this possible. The stakes stretched beyond this room, beyond this one fragile life. The hum of the hospital receded, leaving only the pump's whisper and the symphony of data in my ears. I clung to Michael's hand, to the comfort of his presence, as I waited for a verdict written in numbers. The line on the monitor steadied, then crept ever so slightly upward. My breath caught. I leaned in, reading the display's tiny digits. Heart rate, 78 beats per minute, stable. SpO2, 98%, improving. WBC count, 5.2 to 6.8, rising. Cytokine level, within safe range. A small gasp escaped me, and I caught Michael's hand in both of mine. The numbers glowed like lanterns of promise. For a moment the storm inside me stilled, a fragile calm settling over my heart. But as I exhaled, ready to allow myself relief, a new alert chimed from the bedside monitor. The vital signs box blinked. Trend deviation detected. The room's hush shattered. Nurses snapped to attention. The lead physician hurried in, and Michael's eyes widened in alarm. My breath hitched. The data that had steadied only moments ago now threatened to veer off course. The monitors scrolled a small upward spike in inflammatory markers. Minor, perhaps, but enough to prick our fragile peace with dread. I felt my heart lurch, tears stinging anew. Hope and terror collided in my chest. The lab team surged forward, surrounding the console as though bracing the machine against a storm. Michael stood, gaze fixed on the screen, jaw clenched with determination. I gripped his hand, voice barely a whisper. No matter what happens, I'm here. He met my eyes, fierce and unwavering. And I'm not letting go. We stood locked in that moment, at the threshold between triumph and heartbreak, poised on the knife's edge of possibility. Every second mattered now. Every heartbeat, every data point, every breath of fear and hope swirling in the alloy of our souls. And then, the vital signs steadied, marking either our greatest triumph or our deepest sorrow. If you want to join me on this journey, hit subscribe and tap the bell so you never miss an update. Tell me in the comments which moment moved you the most. I read every single one. If this story touched your heart, give it a like to help me bring you more powerful tales. Share this video with your friends so they can experience this emotional ride too. Become part of our community for all the latest updates. Your voice matters here.